I just now listened back to those previous two episodes in which I, in a non-flippant way, laid out what I think, which is not something I do usually. Uh, and and as I was listening, I was thinking, wow, that could end up 40,000 episodes. And you could lay out a whole political sort of point of view eventually. That's the sort of thing you'd start with, those two episodes, and then you'd build on those things. Inevitably, I thought of a few other things that I could have said as I went, but I never bother worrying about that. That's a given. You're speaking off the top of the head. You're not writing an essay and then reading it out, are you? But the White Australia policy jumped into my head. I've spoken about that before, and I started to get a little bit sensitive to what the original founding bastards were on about with the White Australia policy and the people of constitutional Australia, because I waxed lyrical in that previous episode about our major advances in 888 and 8 hours of work, 8 hours of leisure, and 8 hours of sleep, and also full political rights for women, and minimum wages, and wage conditions, and living conditions, and fairness, and all that sort of stuff, and unionism, and all that sort of stuff, which was like a part of the fabric of the Australian culture back then. And I start to think about all that, and that's from the left-leaning perspective. And I can imagine leftists. One day I'll have to go back and listen to the debates, or read the debates that led to the White Australia policy. I don't think it was much to do with, it wasn't to do with anti-black sentiment. I know that much. It was anti-Chinese sentiment, if anything, and we've still got that, believe it or not, amazingly, but I started to think, and I've listened to other people speak about this before. Having non-Europeans come here at the start, after Federation, would have risked all that. Now, it would have been the right thing to do to open the doors, as it is the right thing to do that now. Back then it would have been the right thing to do, to not have a European Australian policy, which is what it was. It wasn't quite a White Australia policy, it was a European Australian policy. It would have been the right thing to do to open the doors. Why shouldn't a Chinese person be allowed to come here? Putting the Indigenous people aside, of course, because they would vote no. And they would vote no to us as well. But, if I was an Indigenous person, as I say, I wouldn't be happy about refugees coming here and all that sort of stuff. I wouldn't be happy with anyone coming here. But that's a whole other story. I went to the Melbourne Museum once, and a local mob here, they had a saying, "Come visit," but then go home afterwards. Something like that. It's written in Indigenous language on a sign in the Melbourne University. Got a huge Melbourne Museum. It's got a huge Indigenous section there. Anyway, but I start to see, it's not black and white. If Australia had a unique moment in the history of the planet in which they were pushing ahead with these sorts of reforms, and to open the borders would have smashed all of that. Now, at that moment in time, the founding bastards probably had a much better, much more value-driven ideal in keeping the Chinese out. It's going to bite us in the bum. We'll be punished for that eventually. We'll be punished for that, and bad luck. I'm fully supportive of you, China, if you want to kick us for that one. Go for it. But anyway, having said that, and by the way, I am pessimistic about where we're going to end up out of the coronavirus and the economic crash that's going to come probably, and all that sort of stuff, especially if we don't find a vaccine, you know. To a certain extent, I'm fatalistic. This is going to get messy. There's going to be hunger, even in a place like Australia, and all that sort of stuff. But I don't want to make it an episode about that. Anyway, so where was I? So look, I started to think about all that stuff, the dreams and the ideals, because it's a very strange thing, isn't it? Because Australia, the very first couple of policies we made, one was the White Australia policy, and the other one was for political rights for women. Are we utter bastards and utter wonderful people at the same time? It gets complicated. It's not that complicated. It's just the messiness of human existence, But a couple of other things that, sprang to my mind as I was listening to my previous episodes, in which I put forward my conservative view, which was basically a view that suggests, conserve our political structure, conserve the far left, conserve the far right in small portions, because that will be proportional to the number of far lefts and far rights we've got in Australia, and conserve the other sorts of left and the other sort of rights and the middles and all the others. Conserve it all. Conserve the socialists and all that sort of stuff, in proportion to what you have in a population. Everyone needs to be catered for, even the bastards. You can try and stamp them out, but you'll just make them come back bigger. So don't even try it. If you're right-leaning, would you like to stamp out the left? If you do, you're going to get something much harder left to come back at you. Conserve and encourage the left, because the left needs to be listened to too. And if you are a leftist, and you wouldn't mind just stamping out the rednecks, as you might call them, don't do that, because they'll come back harder. It's dumb, that's all. I'm not saying I like the hard left or the hard right. I'm just saying it's dumb to try and stamp them out by force, or cancel them or anything. To a certain extent, you've got to live with bastards, because you're a human. It's like if you were in a chimpanzee colony, you have to live with the fact that, some of the young chimpanzees you're growing up with as a young chimpanzee are going to grow up and actually tear you to pieces in a battle one day. Your cousins, who you love in a chimpanzee way, are going to teeth, claws, you know what I mean? They're going to scratch you and bite you to death and to actually rip you into pieces, It's just part of human and chimpanzee existence, all right, and bonobo as well. All right, so there's that. Maybe the great apes, I don't know. Less so, because they're less human, aren't they? What else sprang to mind as I was speaking the previous episodes? I didn't mention social media, and I really do like to mention social media when I can, because that's a change. Because I've got this look. I'm very pessimistic about the way that our prospects coming out of this in the age of coronavirus and economic crashes that will come of that. And I'm very pessimistic about all that. But let's imagine we find a vaccine and we get back on track. All right. I would like to get back to the tangent that I think we were on with Indigenous reconciliation. But there's a wrecking ball in the room, and it's called social media. I really think that thing is a wrecking ball. And the reason for that, I think, it's a little bit like the media. It's profit-driven. It's not values-driven. The structure, that is, the structure of social media, the platforms. Not what's being said on there, the actual structure. And there's more of a profit to be made in dividing societies and getting them shouting at each other. there's more of a profit to be made in that, So, they need to turn a profit, so they encourage that in the very structure of the platforms, the software coding. Now, I think that that needs to be looked into, because we can't get back on track with what I think was a very positive tangent that we were on before social media came along. With that Indigenous reconciliation, for example, and other things. With all our faults back then, of course. But I don't think we can do it with social media the way it is, because it's adding heat, and this needs to be done a little bit calmer than that, because you can't shout your way towards progress in a conservative way. So then I think that's an issue, and I think the heat needs to be taken out of social media, and I think the only way to do that is from a coding perspective. I think it's inevitable, in my opinion, there's going to be government intervention with respect to I think governments around the world might take over social media and commandeer it like they commandeer factories during a war. I think that will happen eventually, and I don't think that will turn out nicely. They'll use it for their own evil ends. You see, that's the problem. I wish that it was... it'd be nice if governments around the world could be moderate in their reaction to the fact that social media has got out of hand, because I think it has. And rather than just take over social media, that they instead intervened on, put rules in place, not about what is being said. See, that's the focus of social media moguls and stuff. We will moderate what people say. But what I think it needs to be moderated is the very structure of social media, the software coding, to encourage more dialectic and less shouting and all that sort of stuff, and more healthy debate and critical thinking and all that sort of stuff. You can do that as a software person. Everyone's saying, "Oh, we'll reform," but we still want. But inside they're still thinking, "Yes, but we still want to turn a profit." The government needs to step in and say, "We don't care so much about how much you're moderating what is being said on your platforms. We want you to alter the structure of your platforms so that you are not encouraging shouting and then trying to moderate that later." So, I didn't mention social media at all in the previous 2 episodes, but I think the heat needs to be dialed down on social media, but that can't be done by the people. It has to be done by the software coders, the owners, if you like. And if they don't do it, someone like Donald Trump will just take over Twitter. He'll commandeer it. He'll own it. I think he's trying to get Americans to, he's forcing China to sell TikTok. You can read the tangent that this is all on. Like, for example, you've got social media censoring an American president in terms of what he says. And that's unsustainable. Even if you hate the guts of the American president, to have a private company pick and choose, even if you agree with what that private company is censoring, even if you agree with that censoring, but it's not about what is being said, no matter how bad it is. It's about whether you find that not dangerous. Private citizens having power over the President of America, it turns the Constitution on its head a little bit in a slightly dangerous way. Hey, you might be into revolution and the people controlling everything, but hey, have you watched the performance of people on social media? Are you careful what you wish for? But even if Donald Trump says the worst thing in the world, he is the president, and if if you're okay with private companies creating laws that have jurisdiction over the President of America, is that not laws that sit above the laws of America? Now, people often stumble here, I think countries often stumble, because all the people agree with what's being censored. But the thing to think about is the fact it's being censored. That's the issue. You can say the worst possible thing, but you need to be worried, I think, about the fact that he can be censored. That's far more dangerous than anything bad he might say. Short of a war, declaring war on Twitter, but look, you know what I'm getting at. Because when your guy gets in, you might have Rupert Murdoch might buy Twitter and then censor Joe Biden, not allow him to say things that break the laws of Rupert Murdoch, the boy from Melbourne. Careful what you wish for, all that stuff. I doubt that there's anything else I can say, except, of course I could say a lot more. I could go on for hours like this, But, I'll sit here for a second and see if I have another thought along all these lines. So social media, I forgot to talk about that, and it's always relevant these days. Yep, dial the heat down. I did mention in my episodes that I would like to conserve things as they are in Australian politics. Now, that could easily be misinterpreted, and I don't mind being misinterpreted. I'm not into being understood. Usually, I seek to be misunderstood, but, for the hell of it, I'll just mention that when I say I'd like to conserve Australia the way it is, I don't mean in terms of our policies and all that sort of thing. I still want progress via left and right politics and all the other politics. I still want progress. When I said I want to be a conservative, I mean conserve the system. Not what the system is deciding, but the system itself. It's a very big difference. So I'd like to conserve the Australian system. I wouldn't want to go to an American system, for example. That would be awful. It's too much risk. It's nothing to do with the monarchy. It's to do with the system, As I think I mentioned, we have a head of state that's only made one decision in 120 years of any note. And because our head of state, who is essentially the Governor-General and not the Queen anyway, our head of state is not elected, which is brilliant. Because if he was elected, or she was elected, she would have to promise things to get elected. And suddenly you've got a head of state actually trying to do things because he or she has to do things to stay elected, and anyway, he or she promised to do things anyway. An absolute disaster. Australia, pity the land that needs heroes, like Donald Trump, or Obama. Pity the land that needs heroes. We've got a much better system, I think. Leave it to the system to decide how to get progress going, but conserve the system. That's the extent, the level upon which I'm a conservative. Conserve the system, and then get the system to create progress. But I love the fact that our head of state never does anything. I think our head of state has done one thing in 120 years, and is that not the sign of a mature country? The American head of state, he's, as I said, signing executive orders almost, and it comes across panic-like, a constant state of crisis. in which he's forced to sign executive orders every 12.5 minutes. This is not something that I would like to go to here in Australia. It's a mess. It's absolute disaster that, not that America's got Trump, but that it needed Trump. That's the problem. If we went to a republic, we could go to a sober style of republic, something like the Irish Republic. My mum always says that would be nice. But I think there's a greater danger that we would end up with an American-style republic. And with that, I'll just mention there's a few texts coming through even as I'm speaking. They come at the top of my screen as I'm talking. She's chatting about Donald Trump, actually, I can see. And she's imagining what it would be like to have a Donald Trump here, I think. I haven't read the texts properly because I'm talking and they're just flicking at the top of the screen, so I sort of see them. So I'm multitasking here. I'm thinking about what she's saying up there, but it's got nothing to do with what I'm talking about. She's saying we need, if we had a Donald Trump here, what would that look like? And in my head, I'm thinking, well, the cabinet, there'd be a leadership spill straight away anyway, because we don't vote for someone like Donald Trump here in Australia. We don't vote for a leader. We vote for a party, and then the party decides who is the Prime Minister. So it's kind of a non-issue, really. We can't have a sort of Donald Trump kind of figure here in Australia, thank goodness, in my opinion. I'll put it this way: Donald Trump could get coronavirus tomorrow. Stop cheering, and there'd be a kind of crisis, a constitutional crisis over there. But ScoMo, our Prime Minister, could get sick tomorrow. Stop cheering, and nothing would happen. Because we've got the Westminster system and all that sort of stuff, and the Prime Minister doesn't make decisions anyway. The Cabinet votes on party room decisions. ScoMo has never signed an executive order in his life and never will. I think. I'm not an expert on politics. The party room votes on what should happen. No, the Cabinet votes. You can't have a Trump here in Australia. This is why I wouldn't mind conserving our system. What would happen in that situation if ScoMo got coronavirus and got knocked out for 6 weeks or 6 months or whatever, and he's in ICU? I hope not. Then the rest of the Cabinet just continues business as usual and keeps voting on things. The only time the Prime Minister steps in if there's a tied vote on a party room decision, on a Cabinet decision. That's the only time that ScoMo actually does anything. We've got a wonderful system in Australia where there's no single person that actually does anything. It's a lot more consensus driven and all that sort of stuff. I could go on and on and on. You could vote Trump in as the Governor General, which is another story, but then you can't. It's a wonderfully balanced system we have here in Australia because the Prime Minister chooses the Governor General, isn't it? The government of the day does. Okay, so that's that too. It's all wrapped up. You can't have a Donald Trump character getting into the top job in Australia. You can only get hardened politicians, professional politicians coming through, because they get weeded out in the process of, the parties and all that sort of stuff. We don't get wild cards like Donald Trump. In Australia, we don't get people like Kanye West actually having a shot at going for president. Because there's a guy with a clear mental illness, and it's actually technically possible for him to get his hands on the briefcase. Say no more. What a way to finish.